welcome back. My name is Julia Terkovic. I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy. And I'm really delighted to be here and to see so many of you still here, especially after lunch, for the third and final panel of the 2023 edition of the Brussels Korea Forum. In this session, we will focus on the current challenges and perspective for South Korea and Europe in dealing with energy security risk while fighting climate change. World energy demand is surging. Oil, coal, natural gas still meet most global energy needs, creating serious implications for the environment. Energy security and climate change mitigation priority should be considered jointly, and the false dichotomy that the world must choose between energy security and climate change should be avoided. That said, the geopolitical challenges posed by Russia, and now also coming from the Middle East, urge energy policy leaders to look at where the transition to greener energy sources stands amid geopolitical tensions. Minister Park Jin this morning reminded us about recently signed green partnership between Europe and Korea. President Karel de Gucht also highlighted that for Europe, the only alternative to China to get solar panel is Korea. So resolving energy security and environmental concern is a key challenge for policymakers today. But how are Europe and Korea responding to these challenges? What are the areas where Europe and Korea can cooperate more? So I'm very happy after all these questions. I'm very happy that today we have the possibility to discuss all of them with a great panel of experts. We have Elena Mastantuono, Vice President of TENT, and she promised that she will explain you what this is, a TENT section of the European Economic Social Committee. We then have Professor Sin Young Han, professor in the Department of International Relations at the Seoul University, and also advisor to the Republic of Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Finance and Strategy at the Korea Electric Power Corporation. A very busy man, you can say. He is also the author of the book Power Struggles, Energy Security and Energy Diplomacy in the Asia Pacific, so very relevant for this panel. And finally, Professor Sung Yong Chung, professor at Korea University and director of the Center for Climate and Sustainable Development, Law and Policy of Seoul International Law Academy. So thank you very much for joining us for this panel, first of all. And Professor Chung, let's start with you. The idea would really be consider your role and your experience would be for you to set a bit the scene and present to the group here what are the main challenges that South Korea and Europe are facing in tackling climate change, and in particular what is the impact of recent geopolitical tensions. So, floor is yours.
So my starting point is that looking at cooperation between Europe and Republic of Korea. And then we heard that there were several very important even legal foundations. That's very rare, right? Most of them with the United States are statesman joint declaration, but we do have legally binding agreements. And then one of the good things that we can have a very solid foundation to talk about that, but be careful. Sometimes you are missing something very, very important. Okay, that's my first starting point. Okay, so talking about climate change, if you focus on, there is a climate risk, right? There are typhoons and then the sea level rise. Yeah, they are very, very important. But you are looking at adaptation issues. But if you are in climate area, you may know that adaptation is getting more important in the context of the nexus between mitigation and adaptation. In other words, you do adaptation in a mitigation way. Otherwise, you cannot get the funding. Okay, that's a very strong signal coming from both public and private sectors. In that sense, once again, looking at this political framework that I've been looking at, well, that's great. And then number two, there is an even section about energy security, one, climate change, two, but in case of climate, they are very outdated. They are missing many points that the Paris Agreement has. Do you know what is the big difference between Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement? Kyoto failed. Why? It adopted a legally binding regulation, obligation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions where we don't have enforcement mechanism available, right? So that's why. Spirit-wise, it was great, but it was not realistic. Paris Agreement, all about what? Do you know what are 3 means of implementation of the Paris Agreement? Anybody knows? That 3 means of implementation include finance, technology, and capacity building. In other words, working for the developing countries. Do you know what are the 3 objectives of the Paris Agreement by Article 2 of the Paris Agreement? Mitigation and adaptation, there is one more. Do you know what it is? Financial flow. In other words, real focus of the Paris Agreement is to make new energy systems and then promoting new industries. Reading, say, one report by McKinsey, they are saying that electrifying our lives is one of the major things that we have to do. That's why electric vehicles are booming. From my point of view, it can be read as a part of the supply chain and economic security, but there is a bigger angle that we also need to know. That comes from the climate change mitigation perspective. United States has IRA. From my point of view, it's all about the climate change. You do have a CBAM. Can you discuss about the CBAM without thinking about the climate or without putting climate in the center of the issues? I don't think so.
We're a civil society advisory body to the EU institutions, to the Council, European Parliament, and to the Commission. So now I will rather go to the European Union and give you EU's perspective on that. But just to tell you, you mentioned the challenges of climate change and energy security. We will be talking about this today. But to tell you, in the committee, we're just working on a blue deal on water scarcity and water security, and I think it will be a big topic for Europe next year. As you said, Professor, we've been severely witnessing the climate change and geopolitical tensions, and these aspects are seriously putting global energy security at risk, threatening the reliability of energy supply. The climate change itself affects every aspect of the energy system, from the extraction, processing, and transport of the energy minerals to the potential efficiency and reliability of power generation, to the physical resilience of energy infrastructure, and further, it's impacting energy demand patterns. The impact of the climate change on demand side, as well as the threat to energy supply, must be taken into account when designing and strengthening the resilience of energy systems. In the last decade, the EU has been working on both energy security and climate change response. So if we look back in 2014, the EU adopted the European Energy Security Strategy, which is an integral part of the 2030 policy framework on climate and energy. And it was not accidentally that it has coincided with the events in Ukraine. The time February 2014 means the Maidan Revolution, and then the outbreak of the Russia-Ukrainian war. So being aware of the high dependency on Russia and the ongoing conflict, the strategy recommended to reduce the number of EU member states that are exclusively dependent on one single gas supplier. And it also reminded the winters of 2006 and 2009 of temporary disruptions of gas supplies that strongly hit EU citizens in some EU member states. I remember, I'm from Czech Republic, in January 2009, when the Czech Prime Minister was the chair of the EU presidency, he had to travel to Moscow and meet Vladimir Putin, that time Prime Minister, and negotiate about securing the energy supply through Ukraine to Europe. So this led the European Commission to establish in 2015 the Energy Union Strategy, which rests on 5 pillars: on energy security, on decarbonizing the economy, on energy efficiency, on research and innovation, and on internal energy market. So the threat and the warning were there. Unfortunately, they were not taken seriously by some member states, who even deepened their dependency on Russian gas. Let's say they were pleased by the cheap Russian gas, and the wake-up call was actually February last year when Russian forces invaded Ukraine, and the EU had to immediately react. So the reaction was the Repower EU, which has been adopted in May last year, and it had the aim to save the energy, meaning to decrease the energy and electricity consumption by households and the industry, to speeden the rollout of renewables and clean energy, and to diversify our energy supplies. So the external part of the Repower EU has been embedded in the strategy for EU external energy engagement. So the EU secured the new supplies, increased the imports from the US and from Norway mainly, either via pipeline from Norway or LNG deliveries from the US and Norway as well. And then, of course, the EU started negotiating with third countries. And among others, the Repower EU recognized that the energy supply, and I remind you these 5 pillars of the energy union, that the energy supply is the priority number 1, even though we were fighting against the climate change, because the gas, the Russian gas, could have been exceptionally replaced by dirtier energy sources such as oil or coal. So surprisingly for me, there was a little on a nuclear energy, which is a clean and low emission energy source. However, we have seen since last year this renaissance of nuclear energy in Europe, and we can see this fight for this low emission source when the EU member states are negotiating the new design of electricity market and the next net zero act. So the energy crisis prompted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine stressed the importance of energy security. However, the climate disasters such as heat waves, and we've seen that in Greece this year, cyclones and floods again, Slovenia or Greece, reminded us the importance of the resilience of the infrastructure, the power system, which has to be, let's say, reliable and react to these shocks. More frequent and intense droughts in some regions could also interrupt critical minerals production, thermal plant cooling, and this we've seen actually during the energy crisis, and hydropower generation. So sea level rise could threaten energy infrastructure in coastal areas. Therefore, climate change affects the entire energy supply chain, including fuel production, mining, power generation, and grids. And at the same time, the climate change will change energy demand patterns. For instance, increasing needs for cooling, because the temperature should increase. And if we add the increasing need for electrification, this will be a really big pressure for the network. So the network needs to be robust, ready for climate change, and operate under climate shocks. At the same time, the change should be used as much as possible as the opportunity for the deployment of clean and renewable energies. And with the crisis, the EU realized that it had to rely more on itself, use its own resources, and break away from dependence. But this does not mean that it should close itself off from the world. And here I see the space for the cooperation with our global partners, especially with South Korea. The Republic of Korea is a highly industrialized global leader in innovation and technology. And there is a space to work much closer together on the adaptation to the climate change through the research and innovation and education, because you need also highly skilled people for that. Deployment of hydrogen, renewables, nuclear energy, and small modular reactors, but also energy storage, because you have a great experience on that, could be a great area of cooperation. In May, the EU and the Republic of Korea launched formal negotiations on association to Horizon Europe. That is a European framework program for research and innovation. And the cooperation on energy security and climate change must happen through innovation. It's been already happening because Korean companies and civil society is already in a European program, Horizon Europe. So we already have a great example. And so let me conclude by saying that geopolitical tensions and climate change create an enormous challenge to the power system. However, adaptation to climate change is inevitable. Innovation can help find more efficient and reliable solutions, and cooperation in this field has a great potential. Recent global supply chain disruptions of critical materials, such as rare earths, energy, and geopolitical risks, require greater attention. And we have to look what are the political realities. And supply chains can be other space for cooperations between the EU and Korea. In terms of dependency, diversification of suppliers as well as energy sources is essential, and the cooperation with reliable partners is key rather than closing oneself off from the world. Thank you.
And the first subject that I want to actually touch upon is how serious the current global energy crunch is, especially in Europe. My opinion is very serious. I think it's more serious than 1970s and 1980s because of 4 reasons. The first reason is we often forget this, but green inflation. We have to remember that green inflation actually started even 8 months before the Russia actually invaded Ukraine. And also number 2 is the 2 wars actually broke out. And number 3 is there is no sign for decreasing energy demand in the near future. And also lastly, the price of every energy commodity is skyrocketing. I mean, from natural gas, coal, oil, and also critical minerals, the copper. I mean, for example, the price of lithium. I mean, everybody knows what lithium is about, right? Lithium is the necessary raw materials for energy transition. The price of lithium actually has gone up by 560% compared with the first half of 2021. And secondly, and thirdly, I want to briefly touch upon what is ROK, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's energy security objectives. I think energy securities, the ROK's energy security goals and objectives can be summarized into actually largely 6 segments. The first one is actually Yoon Suk-yeol administration, basically the pursue the zero carbon policy. So particularly we focus on much the hydrogen economy, the development of hydrogen economy. At the same time, ROK's the Yoon administration is also stressing the importance of the nuclear power generation and also nuclear power diplomacy with every parts of the world. And also at the same time, we want to strengthen the mineral security partnership as both bilateral, multilateral, also minilateral framework. So we want to actually develop the special relationship with Indonesia, Canada, Australia, and also Zambia, and also other parts of the world. And most importantly, I think the cooperation with the United States is the top priority for the ROK's energy security objectives. Not only in terms of energy transaction between the two sides, but also the wide range of energy infrastructure projects in the third countries actually is a really significant element of ROK's energy security. At the same time, also we want to develop the energy alliance with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE. Also, that's pretty much the summary of our ROK's energy security objective. And finally, the most important, I think, as far as the element of collaboration and also cooperation between the ROK and EU are concerned, I think the construction of the LNG terminal, especially in the western part of Europe, is much more substantial. Especially the Korea gas company is called the KOGAS. KOGAS can play a pivotal role in the helping the Europeans the LNG infrastructure. Not only with that, also ROK and also the EU can work together about LNG swapping, or actually we can update some of the European LNG inventory system, because my opinion is that I think the current volume of the European LNG inventory is way too small. For example, during the harsh winter, I think the current level of the European LNG inventory is only equivalent for surviving 2 days. I think it's very small. So I think the Korea can actually and EU can work together to update some of the volume of the LNG inventory. And also the nuclear power cooperation between EU and also ROK is very substantial. Already nuclear power cooperation between central part of Europe and also eastern part of Europe, such as Romania and Czech Republic, is already in the process. And also, at the same time, the ROK and EU should cope with the Russian energy policy. I mean, I'm originally the Sovietologist. I think the Russia actually wants to pursue the divide and conquer policy in Europe and also in Asia as well. So I think we need to share some wisdom and also advice from the EU. And also, as Dr. Aliena has briefly mentioned, I think ROK and also EU can work together about the green technology. I think namely the ESS, energy security system, and also power grid project. I think these two elements are crucially important to realizing the energy transition itself. You know. But none of the developed countries can actually now purchase the complete ESS system. So I think EU and also ROK definitely work together to improve the technology. Not only with that, actually the coal power plant abated facility and also the continued the improvement of CCUS technology are the most substantial part of the future cooperation.
Geopolitical risks, you know, we have the European elections next year in June, which might actually change the structure of the House, which is not far from here. And it will also certainly change the view on how the Green Deal should look like in the next mandate of the EU. I think, and you've mentioned that people get aware that the green transition is a pretty expensive project, and they start to change their mind on how they perceive the need to combat the climate change. And this aspect, because nobody told them that it has some price, and I think that this aspect will also play its game during the elections, and this might also change the structure of the European Parliament. So let's see. So maybe this could be an aspect that I see from the European perspective. On China, yes, of course, we're drastically decreasing our dependence on Russia. However, at the same time, we're drastically increasing our dependence on China, and especially on clean technologies that we're importing to Europe, like buffers and panel and solar PVs. And the Net Zero Act that the European Union, the Commission presented, is actually about that, on how should we produce more of these technologies in Europe. Our limit is that we don't have the access to raw earths like other continents have, like China, for instance. Therefore, we call this concept of open strategic autonomy, because we have to remain open. We have some sources in Europe, like lithium and others, but however, it's very limited. And the Net Zero Act also speaks about how we should continue to open or let's say continue to use the raw materials in Europe. So it's definitely a challenge for us. So first aspect was do it at home in Europe, and second is to diversify our suppliers, and that was when I mentioned the reliable partners that we need to look for outside of the EU.
Great.
As discussed today, we are living in a closely interconnected society. This linkage can provoke a regional event to grow into a global one. We feel one such event can have impact on our daily lives. As we see the war in Ukraine, DPRK's repeated nuclear tests and aggressive missile launches, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, as well as this week's terrorist attack in Brussels. My President Yoon Suk-yeol delivered in the recent UN General Assembly remarks, Korea commits to playing a responsible role in global affairs. Korea will enhance contribution to and cooperate with international partners on the issues of security, economy, technology, health, environment, and culture. As is well known to us, the European Union is leading the rule-based international order, pursuing unbiased and balanced views on global issues. This makes the European Union our key partner that shares core values such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. That's why in recent Korea-EU summit in May, we established our strategic dialogue at foreign ministerial level to further enhance our comprehensive security partnership. Moreover, the Korea-EU bilateral trade volume is increasing for the last 3 years in a row. European Union continues to be the number one investor to Korea. Korean companies offer Europe with key resources and technologies that can help facilitate green and digital transformation. My dear panelists and participants, having said that, I believe today's forum reflects well the areas where Korea-EU partnership can go deeper. And I, as the Korean ambassador to European Union, will make utmost efforts to facilitate our relations, not only in bilateral terms, but also in addressing regional and global challenges. Once again, I thank you all for honoring this occasion with your valuable participants today. Merci, thank you, 감사합니다.